This is Fearless Leadership with Brendan Keegan, a production of Forbes Books, conversations with leaders who provide valuable, candid insights from their journeys and share their secrets to what made them successful and fearless.
This week's Fearless Leader is British racing driver and Le Mans champion, Phil Hanson. Phil etched his name into the history books in 2020 by becoming the youngest British driver ever to win the iconic Le Mans 24, taking the LMP2 class, that's the Le Mans Prototype 2 class victory with United Autosports. Now there's a great team. He's already a veteran with over 50 professional races despite being in his early 20s. That's pretty amazing. He's established himself as one of the endurance racing's brightest talents and history-making Le Mans champions. Phil, welcome to today's podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brendan.
Okay, so let's go way back. And what inspired you to start go-karting and then pursue a career in racing?
I guess it all started when I first got in a go-kart, which was considered quite late at the time. It was probably around, when I say I got in go-karts when I was younger, but never really picked up a passion because it was normally on holiday or something. I always enjoyed it, but never really gave it a go. When I started, obviously, at my local kart track, I was in my already sort of 11 or 12 years old, but by the time I actually got myself into a proper race go-kart, I was in the latter part of my 13s and sort of around 14, which sounds still like, you're a child, but in the sport, it's considered really late. Kids start between the ages of 6 and 8 typically. From there, at that point onwards, I quickly got grounded in the sport and won the British Kart Championship. I think at that time it was called Super One in 2015 in my category, and then pursued straight into cars. But I guess the point at which I really decided to make a career out of it, at that point, try and make a career out of it, was sort of 2016, 17, where I was still at school. And I had to make a decision about whether I was going to pursue university or not. At that point, I'd been racing cars already, and I'd seen the sort of impact that it had on my education and the difficulty it was to balance both. Luckily, I was managing it quite well, but I think the step up in education to university would have been really tricky. So at that point, luckily, my dad was quite supportive of my journey, and he was happy and willing to let me, venture into this sport and see what I can make of it. And I'm so glad I did that. It would have been a bit silly to have let that all go to waste just to have some mediocre degree at this point.
Was there some moment in there, any memory, a race, a championship, just a day that you can remember when you said, "Hey, this is the path for me"?
Yeah, there wasn't necessarily one moment, because quite often any success that you get in the sport is quickly forgotten, and what really drives you is all the failures. Like any sport. But in motorsport specifically, outside of Formula One, it's very rare to have one car or one driver dominate consistently. So quite often we're faced with a lot more loss than we are a win. And motorsport is interesting. I'm sure other sports, and especially in high-level sports, it's similar. But you really feel like you've lost if you finished anything other than first, if you do anything apart from win. So after I won my first Le Mans in 2020, my mindset about that race in particular completely changed. Up to that point, we'd come so close to getting on the podium many years. And up to that point, I would have settled almost for a podium, because it's the biggest race in endurance racing. It's one of the biggest races in the world. And a podium seemed like such an accomplishment. After having won that race, I couldn't care less about finishing second or third or fourth or fifth. Anything apart from winning, it's just a smaller trophy in the cabinet next to the big trophy that I won in 2020. So it does change your outlook on success a little bit. It's difficult to really narrow down exactly when I said I'd definitely have a career in the sport, because I was constantly looking for optimal and marginal gains throughout my entire career. Probably around the sort of 2019, 2020, 2021 years is when I really realized I could have a solid career in the sport with, a lot of longevity. There's not, a huge amount of career security in motorsport, but winning WEC and winning Le Mans and winning the European Le Mans Series in 2020 was around then where it kind of set in.
Well, so there's an American movie. It's a little bit of a spoof that maybe didn't make its way over to the UK. Talladega Nights with Ricky Bobby. So you're giving some credibility to the saying, if you're not first, you're last. Once you're first at Le Mans, like, it's no longer about the podium, it's about being first. So who knew we were going to find out today that Ricky Bobby's dad,
he was right all along.
had it right. So, hey, let's talk about what attracted you to endurance racing, because endurance racing is very different. There's a couple of you, there's a team, it's longer. What attracted you to that compared to other forms of motorsport?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the honest truth about why I entered endurance racing as opposed to the typical ladder of single seaters, which people normally do out of go-karts, following the path of Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2, and trying to get into Formula 1. It was really an accident. It was probably immature guidance from some unqualified people early in my career, which pushed me into endurance racing, never having experienced single seaters. I think in my early days, that was a slight hindrance to my progression and development as a driver because of the difference in track time, and the level of insight you have in single seaters is very different to endurance racing. There's a lot more aspects in endurance racing that you don't cover in single seaters. However, in single seaters, you really do fine tune your driving, and it's very specific about you because you don't rely on anybody else. However, having said that, looking back now, it was a blessing in disguise, because by the time I kind of got settled in endurance racing, and I was, performing well, the sport was in a bit of an unknown territory. It was the first time in about 6 to 10 year period where the top category at Le Mans had kind of fizzled away, and there wasn't really staple manufacturers in the top category. Hence why LMP2 was so competitive. So I found myself in a very competitive category. However, it wasn't considered the top category at the time. But fast track to now, where I'm beginning my prime, feeling like I'm the best I've ever been, getting better still, and able to compete at a very high level. It's now in hypercar, which is a top category. It's coincided quite nicely with the entrance with lots of manufacturers into the sport, which means there's a lot more opportunity for a person like me at the point in my career that I'm in. And timing like that really only happens with luck. You can't really plan it. I would have had to have started my career a few years early, which never would have happened, for it to have gone differently. So whilst it was an accident and probably misguidance initially early in my career, it's positioned me really nicely where I am now in hypercar. I have many opportunities ahead of me, and I feel like I'm sort of entering a better state of my actual performance and career.
So I think one of the takeaways, one of the lessons for our listeners out there, is success isn't always a straight line. As you said, it didn't go-kart F4, 3, 2, 1, and in that path, maybe through some misguidance or accident, or opportunity, depending on how you look at that accident. Was it an accident, or was it an opportunity, a blessing? I think you said. So I think the lesson out there to folks is, success and being on the podium, let alone being first on the podium at Le Mans is the pinnacle of success, isn't always a straight line, isn't always planned out perfectly, that there's multiple ways to get there. So, to any of our folks out there, if you think that you got some misguidance, or you're taking a step backwards, or you're not where you should be, I think we can look at Phil and look at where he is, and he's just coming into his prime, and he's already had success that many people past their prime never had. And we can kind of take a lesson of it's straight line's great, but most people that have achieved success, have done it in a circular way, and in a surreptitious way, in an accident way, in a misguided way, in not necessarily a straight line. So Phil, thanks for just kind of sharing that with us, and letting us learn how you hit the pinnacle of your sport, but not necessarily in the most traditional way. So let's jump to, we talked about how you connected here, but how did you connect with United Autosports, and what drew you to join that team?
Again, it wasn't really planned. It was more the fact that I'd found myself in LMP2 at a very young age. So I would think I was about 17, and LMP2 had kind of risen out of a few years where it was almost pro-am racing, and it had grown into a almost completely professional category. And I was finding myself without a team, or without a drive, with a manufacturer called Ligier. And at the time, they were developing a new diff or some different homologation upgrade parts to try and compete with some of the other manufacturers. And United's driver Felipe and some of the crew were involved in the development process of that sort of stuff. And I think my dad actually had spoken to a couple of the guys at Ligier and said, Phil is no longer racing for the rest of this year. I think that was 2017. Is there any way he can do some testing alongside the development work that's going to be done? And when that happened, we got our introduction to Felipe and to Richard at United, who was running Ligiers at the time. That's where the introduction started. Me and Felipe got on really well from the offset. And it seemed like quite a strong pairing, because my grading at that time was silver, which is kind of confuses the whole thing. But there's a grading system in LMP2 where you're required to have one silver in the car, and the other two drivers can be made up of whatever you want. However, in ELMS, there was you could get away with a 2-driver lineup. So me and Felipe worked as a pairing. And I'd kind of shot under the radar as a silver at that point because I'd only raced for half a year. So fast track the next season, we were struggling a little bit because the Ligier was slightly weak. We changed the tyre halfway through the season, which gave us a bit of performance. Again, because of that slight struggle, we stayed under the radar for another year as a silver. And then that following year, I think I was deemed a super silver, which is a coined phrase. Some of the teams who rallied together to try and get my grading moved halfway through the year, because they said it was unfair to try and compete with us. I got another year as a silver. And that's ultimately what led to the year that we absolutely dominated everything, which was sort of second half of 19 through to 20. With that whole COVID situation happening, we delayed quite a lot of the season during the 2020 season. But yeah, that's how the introduction really started. It was, again, like you said, it's not a linear progression. It had an upward trajectory, but it wasn't linear. It was kind of felt at the time like 4 steps backwards. We didn't know what we were doing. I wasn't racing. However, I was testing with who was going to be my teammate then for the next few years in a manufacturer I then raced for another season after that, and then had the introduction then to United, which were really probably one of the strongest teams at that point. They'd just finished second that year in LMP2. We then went on to finish 4th or 5th for the next coming year or two, and then we suddenly rose to winning everything in 2020.
That's awesome. So, another nice lesson in there that, obviously you want to go from silver to gold, but, sometimes maybe getting held back silver for a year, like, benefited you, it's, yeah. So wow, some real good lessons here. So let's talk about, so you're preparing for your first Le Mans. I mean, it's considered, obviously one of the most famous races, but it's also one of the most demanding mentally, physically, on the drivers, the car, the crew, everything. So just walk us through like the process of preparing and participating, in your debut of Le Mans. What was that like?
Well, that was back in 2017, before I'd stopped racing for the rest of that season. That was before I was with United. And I had a teammate then called Karun Chandok, and he was an ex-Formula One driver, one of the first, if not the first Indian F1 driver. Really lovely guy. And he was almost a veteran at Le Mans. He'd done it a few times. And he'd actually told me, don't get overwhelmed with this driver's parade the day before the race. It's very easy to get completely carried away, and it zaps your energy, and you're suddenly completely destroyed the night before the race. I was thinking, I couldn't quite comprehend really what he was saying and action it, because how could your energy be sucked away in the driver's parade? You're about to start a 24-hour race, surely that's going to be far more fatiguing itself. But he was absolutely right. I got completely carried away. We were all screaming and with the fans, and he had a fan club out there called the Tweed Army or something, which is basically a collective of drunk English guys wearing tweed. We were one of the few British teams, so we had a lot of, a huge amount of the supporters at Le Mans are actually English that travel over for the weekend. The UK generally is quite a motorsport fanatic audience or population. And yes, a huge amount of English support out there. And I remember just getting absolutely shattered from this driver's parade, which lasts hours, and you're out there in the baking sun in the middle of June, screaming with all the fans and throwing out merchandise and, jumping off the back of this car and signing a bunch of autographs. You're doing all this a handful of hours before the start of the 24-hour race. Luckily, I didn't make any mistake. I was fine, but that's definitely a lifelong lesson I will never forget. Is that driver's parade can be an absolute killer. I think I said that once to one of my teammates who did Le Mans for the first time. I said, look, this is what happened to me. I didn't listen to him. I didn't believe it could do such a thing. You've got to take me seriously. When I passed on the same advice to whoever that was a few years later. But yeah, that experience was crazy. And obviously that was before the pandemic and everything. So the fan base at Le Mans was huge. It didn't take that hit. A couple of years where you had to restrict the viewership and the attendance to the race. So, I mean, at that point, it was I was like a deer in headlights. I was looking everywhere. I was amazed at the manufacturers, the amount of infrastructure that came for the race to support the way the team's set up. And the team I was racing for was almost ill-equipped for Le Mans. They were a very small team against some very big teams with big manufacturers that have been there for many years. Luckily, I had a lot of, my two teammates had driven Le Mans before and, were able to sort of help guide me and the engineer had done it before. And we had, I think, an almost faultless race. We had a slight issue in one of the pit stops, but I think we ended up 10th or something in class, which, considering our raw pace was quite an achievement. So yeah, it was quite a strong first Le Mans. It's rare to have a stronger Le Mans when you're sort of 17.
Yeah. So, and for those people that aren't familiar with Le Mans, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, there's, and my numbers are probably wrong because it grows every year, but there's more than 500,000 fans that come out for that race. So,
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm not exactly sure about the exact number, but there's a lot of fans.
Yeah. So for our American listeners out there, at like a Super Bowl, we'll get 80, 90,000. So multiply that by 5 or 6. And that's the fan base. And those were the people that were all out cheering Phil on as he was going down the concourse and getting caught up, as you were saying, kind of in your first driver's parade. So in 2020, you win the LMP2 class. How did that impact your career and how did it impact your personal life?
I would say it was the worst year to have won Le Mans because of the pandemic. It was right at the middle of everything opening up. So no fans, masks, everything, the whole Monty. And it means that all my photos of winning Le Mans, I've got this horrible mask covering half my face. I'm not going to be ungrateful here and say I wouldn't trade it for the world. I wouldn't, even if I had to wear a complete balaclava on the podium things, I wouldn't care. Winning Le Mans is winning Le Mans. It's just a shame that I wasn't able to enjoy it with my family when I came home and celebrate with my friends because of the climate we were in. But yeah, it was a strange one because we'd won Le Mans at that race, but the way the point system worked, Le Mans counts for double points compared to a normal race weekend. And Le Mans is one of the races in the World Championship. So it actually meant that we'd won the World Championship at Le Mans that year. However, there was still a couple of races of the World Championship still to go. We'd had such a lead at that point. I think we'd gone into Le Mans having won 3 races on the bounce. And we'd kind of all said to each other, me and my teammates, can't believe we've just won 3 in a row. All that definitely means is we won't be able to win Le Mans. There'll be, there's no way you can have this much good karma, no incidences, no contacts with GTs, no penalties, nothing. Something's going to happen at Le Mans. And a huge amount of Le Mans is out of your control because of the fact that it's 24 hours long. There's a huge amount of stress on the cars and the drivers. Mistakes happen, parts fail, you get penalties, another car could hit you, could be a torrential downpour in the middle of the race and you're on the wrong tires, you end up in the wall. All these things are almost out of your control. So to go to Le Mans on the 3-win bounce that we were out at that time and then to win it, I mean, it was incredible and win the championship. So yeah, it really did give me almost a pedestal for my career because there was a lot of talk around United and me at that point and my teammates because of the run that we'd had up to that point. The fact that we were winning all these races. We just won Le Mans. We just won the World Championship. The following race weekend or 2, we'd win the European Championship when we won in Monza. So I think we were the only car ever to win Le Mans, WEC and the LMS all in one year. And the only group of drivers, which in itself was an achievement. I think it was a bit of an anecdote, a marketing exercise for people to find that we were the only people that had done those 3 before. But yeah, it was huge. After that, the next thing to do was to try and win it again. that's been the humbling part of my career for the last few years, is coming to Le Mans with a very competitive car, a very competitive driver lineup, and for the last 3 years now falling short. It has been very tough to take. I think all 3 years I really felt like we had a package that could win. The first year we were battling for the lead. We were constantly running the top 3. Things weren't going our way, but we were sort of 12, 14 hours into the race, well within the top 3. And we had a gearbox failure. The following year, again, we felt like we had the strongest car, and we get taken out at the first corner of the race. Game over. We were 18 laps down the whole race with all the damage that we had. The next year, again, a very competitive car, really strong. We didn't qualify well. We were coming back through the field. And of course, everyone's got these stories, but it is rare to go to Le Mans and have consistently an incredibly strong car. And for the last 3 years, after halfway through the race, we were multiple laps down with no chance of winning, no chance of being on the podium. And I think in all those 3 years, we must have been considered at least one of the top 3 favorites to win. So that's been incredibly humbling. And if anything, it's made me incredibly more hungry.
Earlier, you talked about kind of, your career taking some twists and turns. And here you talk about you made it to the mountaintop and then for a couple of years, some humbling experiences. So what advice would you give to like aspiring young drivers that are kind of listening to this and are looking up to you, who aim to follow in your footsteps? What would be some advice that you'd give to them as they're experiencing their misguidance, or they're experiencing their podium, or they're experiencing their setback? What would you pass on to them, Phil?
Probably pass on a phrase that was given to me by it's probably been said to me many times, but the one I remember is a sports psychologist saying it to me once. He said, control the controllables. Basically control what factors you can actually control. I can't control my teammate getting crashed into the first corner. I can't control an alternator failing halfway through the race. But what I can control is my attitude, how I'm perceived, making sure that I'm not quitting, I'm staying, engaged and focusing on what I can control. When I'm in the car, having a faultless performance. What wouldn't be good is if I sort of thought, the race is over, so for lack of a better word, fuck it, I'm just going to take loads of risk and end up crashing. Or I'm going to do something stupid, I end up hitting someone else. And then the attitude completely changed. My risk portfolio changed because I knew we were out of the race. But it wasn't that. I think in all those 3 years, it was also a product of the environment I was in with United. Everyone did a really good job of staying completely engaged at the task in hand as if we were still fighting for the win. We had incredibly strong races from those points onwards. And I think a lot of the data, when you sift through it, shows that in terms of how strong you were with damage carried, when you know the whole picture of the straight line deficit because we had floor damage from the contact that 1 year, or when we had X, Y, and Z. But yeah, just making sure that you're focusing on what you're bringing to the table. So when things don't go your way, you can sort of still aim to do something with what you've got. Grow in any way, use it as a test session, still perform the best you can, which is always key. Le Mans in itself, you can only drive once a year when the Le Mans 24-hour race is there. You can't go to Le Mans and test. So an opportunity to do tens and tens and tens and tens of laps around there is invaluable. You can't squander those opportunities, even if you've had a disaster. You've got to think about the future and the following year and try and gain as much as you can from what you have.
So when you look back at your journey, and you're still early in your career, as we said, you're into your prime. When you look at your journey so far and the successes you've had, what are you most proud of, and what are some of the goals and objectives that you hope to achieve in the years to come?
Looking back, the winning Le Mans is probably the biggest achievement of mine. From that point onwards, it was just ticking off a few things I wanted to tick off personally. Pole position in the World Championship and qualifying was high up there for me for many years, coming close, and then I was able to tick that one off last year in Japan. Things like that. Just making sure I'm an all-rounded driver that can perform in all the different areas of what makes a complete driver, being able to qualify well, having faultless stints, my fitness game being up there, so I'm not ever feeling fatigued or my fitness doesn't let me down into the races. So looking at all these aspects to make sure I'm not overlooking any details, ultimately ensuring that I can keep growing and keep perfecting my trade, I think is key for pushing sort of my abilities into the long term, because everyone's searching for marginal gains. So if you stand still, you're very much going backwards. So you've got to keep progressing. So yeah, doing that myself is obviously very key. Most drivers do that. Most athletes do that, really. Everyone's looking for marginal gains to try and improve and get better. But moving forward now, I'm obviously in the top category. I'm in hypercar with Hertz Team Jota. So it's a bit of a different environment, a very good environment, great teammates, great team. The car's good. We had a bit of a disappointing first round. We were sort of in the mix. But then we had an issue right at the end, an electrical issue, which saw us DNFing. So we didn't finish that race, which is a shame because it was a strong showing up to that point. However, that's only the first of 7 races this year, of 8 races actually this year. So the goals have changed. Hypercar now is incredibly competitive. There's a huge amount of investment for manufacturers, real top drivers throughout the entire field, really good teams. So it's again, grounding, resetting, looking at where you are. We had a very strong first race. So it makes me think that there's the capability to do a lot and actually shoot for podiums and potentially even race wins. Our sister car finished second at that race where we had our issues. So it shows you what's possible. And obviously this will be the first year where I'm turning up at Le Mans, where the top category is now flourished into what it is now, which is, a huge grid of 18 cars in WEC, and at Le Mans there's going to be 20-something cars, all gunning for all credit, winning the entire Le Mans, the race itself, in the outright top category. So with that comes added pressure and responsibility. But ultimately, everything that I've done in my career up to this point, everything I've been able to achieve in LMP2, which at the time was similar level, the ingredients don't really change. I have to do the same thing now, just in the top category. So a little bit more pressure comes along with that, but ultimately the same ingredient should give the same result. It's just about actioning that and making sure I'm not lifting off. Like I said, if you stand still, you go backwards. So just got to keep finding these marginal gains and keep pushing it, basically. I'm optimistic to see what we can do this year at Le Mans. I think the package is very good. Obviously, the car behaves slightly differently to what I've been used to for the last few years in LMP2, but I'm optimistic. But like I said, humbled as well from the last 3 years that I know what Le Mans can do to you.
Hey, well, Phil, thanks for spending some time with us today, and just a few notes that I took down to kind of recap. I think a little bit of some of the leadership lessons that we learned today about kind of being fearless is that there's different paths to success. Success isn't a straight line, and there's different ways to become successful. I think the second thing that we really take away from you is how winning changes your mindset and is contagious. Getting that win in 2020 just kind of changed your mindset and just made you even want to win more. But then staying humble and really appreciating what you have. I could feel that in your voice just coming across. Like, just make sure you're appreciative of the success you've had. And then in the last couple minutes, we've really heard about, keep growing and perfecting your trade. And then one of my last takeaways is, once you're at the top, and for many of you that are listening who are at the top of your profession, near the top, it's those marginal gains, and it's remaining optimistic and focusing on those marginal gains. So to our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in today. Again, we had Le Mans 24 winner Phil Hanson, previously of United Autosports, in the prime of his career, racing hypercar now, and just a tremendous asset, winning over 50 races in his early 20s. And Phil, thanks for your time today on the Fearless Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
This has been Fearless Leadership with Brendan Keegan. If you want to learn to live and lead fearlessly, go to brendanpkeegan.com. Fearless Leadership is a production of Forbes Books.